The envelope wasn't hidden. Just waiting. Like it knew I'd find it only when I was ready to stop pretending. It was supposed to be a simple task: find the mortgage documents, scan, file, forget. Just something to check off the list on a quiet Sunday, the kind of errand that keeps a home running. A drawer, a folder, a staple, or two. That's all I was expecting. Instead, I found something older than paperwork. Something heavier. The envelope was sun-faded at the corners, brittle like autumn paper. Her handwriting curled across it like a secret spoken gently, too gently. It wasn't labeled. No name, no address. Just the kind of delicate script she used when she was being tender. The kind I hadn't seen in years. And I opened it. Without thinking. Or maybe because I was thinking, but in a part of me I try not to visit too often. The first few lines almost disarmed me. They were beautiful. Earnest. She wrote about driving at night with the windows down, how the silence between songs on the radio made her feel understood. She wrote about laughter, about the ache of wanting to freeze a moment because it was too perfect. It felt like love. But the name wasn't mine. It sat there like a bruise in the middle of a poem. Someone else's name, familiar enough to know I'd heard it before, but never in this context. Never like this. I flipped to the end of the letter and found a date. Ink-stamped, barely legible, faded to the same gray blue as regret. And it sat in the shadow of a month that meant something different to me. The same month I had proposed. The same week, if I remember right. I don't know what changed in that moment. The house didn't tilt. The drawer didn't slam shut. There were no violins, no crashes of thunder. But I changed. It was like a thread had been tugged loose inside my chest, something private and quiet and irreversible. Like when you realize a photo you've loved for years wasn't actually yours. I folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope with the kind of care you'd use to bury a body. Not because I wanted to preserve it, but because I didn't want it bleeding into the rest of my life. I sat there for a long time. Long enough to forget why I'd opened the drawer in the first place. Outside the window, a bird landed on the sill. It stayed for just a breath, then flew off without looking back. Fast. Clean. Like it had already moved on. I wish I could do the same. I didn't want to know more. But that's not how the mind works. It loops. Rewinds. Invents endings for stories it was never meant to read. I told myself it didn't matter. Just a letter. Just a name. Just the past. But the human mind is a cruel archivist. It doesn't file things away neatly, it spreads them across every silence, replays them in the hollow just before sleep. It shows you a face you know and overlays it with someone else's name. I started seeing her differently. Not suspiciously, intimately, but from a distance. Like watching a home video of someone who no longer remembers your name. The same smile. The same gestures. But wrong somehow, or maybe too right. We were making dinner the next night. She laughed when the pasta water boiled over. A real laugh, a head thrown back, eyes closed for a split second. I used to love that sound. Now I wondered if he had loved it too. If he had cooked with her. If he had memorized her laugh before I ever got the chance. She sat on the couch later, reading, with one foot tucked under her like always. It struck me oddly, brutally, that I'd never asked what she was reading. And now I couldn't. I didn't want to hear the name of a book he might have recommended. Every normal moment began to feel suspicious only because it had once been sacred. Familiarity became evidence. I never searched for more letters. Didn't check the closet or the shoe boxes in the attic. I didn't need to. That single envelope had become a prism. I saw everything through it now. Her yoga mat by the door. Her wedding ring in her gym bag, never on her finger when she came home. The playlist she queued up while making dinner. Lyrics about escape, about drifting, about love that burns through fences. A few months ago, she told me I made her feel safe. I held it like a medal, a reason. A quiet kind of triumph. Now it echoed like a farewell. Safe isn't who you run to. It's who you settle for after you've already run. I didn't cry. I didn't ask. I just watched her from across the table as she twirled spaghetti on her fork and smiled like the world hadn't split open in the junk drawer of our shared life. Because that's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't always announce itself with lipstick stains or late-night texts. Sometimes it lives quietly. Between songs. Between meals. In the space where trust used to sleep. And I was beginning to understand something terrifying. She could love someone with her whole heart and still choose me with her whole life. I stopped remembering things the way they happened. I started remembering them the way they might have been. The proposal used to be my favorite story. I'd tell it like it was scripted, the oak tree in the park, leaves tumbling like confetti, the little velvet box that didn't quite open right. She said yes, her hands trembling, voice soft with joy. I used to believe that tremble meant something beautiful. Now I remember the pause. Not long. Maybe a second. But it was there, the kind of stillness that hums louder in hindsight. The way her lips parted before the word came out. How her eyes didn't meet mine until after she'd said it. Back then I told myself it was nerves. The weight of the moment. Surprise. But now I wonder, was it calculation? Or worse, was it grief? We'd gone to her favorite Italian place that night to celebrate. I remember the way she kept looking out the window like she was waiting for something or someone. She drank more than usual. Her laugh came late, if at all. I thought she was overwhelmed. Now I think she was somewhere else entirely. I've started rewriting my memories. Not on purpose. They just shift. Like old film reels left in a hot attic, warping at the edges. I don't trust them anymore. They've gone soft. And under pressure, they rewrite themselves. Even the photo, the one we took right after I proposed. Her smile looked so real back then. Now I noticed the strain in it. The way her fingers didn't quite grip my arm. Last week, she found it while sorting drawers. She smiled at it like it was a warm memory. Held it up and said, "We look like babies." And I smiled back. Not because I believed her, but because I realized something quieter, something sadder. Maybe she doesn't remember the truth. Or maybe she does and she's just chosen not to say it. Which is worse? That she forgot how uncertain she looked, or that she still carries that uncertainty quietly beneath a practiced smile? Sometimes I wonder if we both agreed to a lie that day. A shared hallucination stitched out of hope and silence. Maybe we both said yes to the version of each other we wished was real. The trouble is, illusions age too. They start to crack in the corners when no one's looking. And now even the good memories feel haunted. Like they're trying to tell me something I refused to hear the first time. I didn't confront her. I adjusted. You learn how to breathe differently underwater. I didn't confront her. Not because I was afraid, at least not in the way people think. I was afraid of the answer. Of the precision with which she might deliver it. Of how calmly she might explain why she once loved someone else while loving me too. So I adapted. You learn how to breathe differently underwater. You ration silence like oxygen. You let the pressure settle in your chest until it feels normal. She noticed, of course. Something in the air shifted, some current she could feel but couldn't name. She began to ask if I was okay. Not in the impatient way, but soft. Careful. Like she knew she was touching a bruise but didn't know where it started. She touched my arm more when we passed in the kitchen. Started offering to make me tea, chamomile, even though she hates it. She lingered in conversations longer than usual, like she was trying to draw something from me without naming what she needed. I told her I was tired. It was true. I just didn't say what from. I began to watch her. Not with suspicion, but with reverence. Or maybe grief. I studied her like I was trying to memorize someone who had already left. What time she came home. The coat she wore when it rained. The songs she hummed while folding laundry, tunes full of longing with lyrics about waiting and wandering. I wasn't trying to catch her in a lie. I was trying to meet the version of her that wrote that letter. The strangest part was she was kind. Attentive. She started rubbing my shoulders again on late nights. Remembered my lunch order without asking. She laughed more freely, but always a beat too late, like she was trying to match my rhythm instead of just dancing in her own. And that's what made it worse. If she could love someone else and still treat me like this. What does love even mean? Is it kindness? Is it comfort? Or is it just habit wrapped in affection? I started sleeping closer to the edge of the bed. Not out of spite. Not as some symbolic protest. It just happened. Like my body knew there was a space between us now, one I couldn't cross without breaking the spell. Some nights I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between her breaths. I wondered if she ever got a reply. If the man she wrote to ever wrote back. And if he did she write again? Was there a second envelope? A third? Is that how love works? Quiet letters folded between the chapters of a life with someone else? I didn't know the answers. But I was learning to live without them. Like learning to breathe in shallow water, never full, never deep, just enough to stay alive. She asked if I was okay. I said, of course. It was the easiest lie I've ever told. We were brushing our teeth. That's all. Just a normal night. The fluorescent hum of the bathroom light. Her hair pinned back. The quiet rhythm of two people sharing space, moving in tandem like we always had. We were like synchronized swimmers in domestic routine, shoulders brushing, rinse and spit, the creak of the faucet handle. But something in the mirror gave me away. You've been a little distant lately, she said, not accusing, just noticing. Like she was checking the weather. I shrugged. Just busy. She smiled. Nodded. Rinsed her mouth. Walked away. And just like that, we built a new truth. A safe one. A version of our life that didn't require digging too deep. I told myself it was mercy. But maybe it was just fear. That night, I slipped the letter into my briefcase. Not to confront her with it. Not to weaponize it. Just to keep it close. To remind myself that I hadn't imagined it, that something real had shifted in the architecture of our life, even if no one else could see the cracks. I carried it like a totem. During lunch breaks at work, I'd find quiet corners. I'd unfold the envelope with the kind of care people use for maps to places they'll never visit again. And I'd reread that first line, not because it hurt anymore, but because it didn't. The pain had settled, hardened, like lava that's gone cold but still scorches the earth beneath it. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't rage. It was understanding. Not clarity, the kind that brings peace, but the dull ache of recognition. Like finally seeing the truth of something that's been in front of you for years, disguised as love. She loved someone once. Maybe she still does. And she chose me anyway. Not because I was her dream, but because I wasn't. I was the quiet path, the safe landing, the steady heartbeat she could fall asleep next to without fear. And for a long time, I thought that was enough. Now, I'm not so sure. Because when someone chooses you for your stillness, it means they've already known the storm. I didn't spiral outward. I spiraled inward. Everything got quieter, but heavier. There's a strange peace in pretending. We woke up, brewed coffee, folded laundry. We discussed grocery lists, weekend plans, a leaking faucet. I held her hand at her sister's birthday dinner. Smiled for photos. Laughed when I was supposed to laugh. She leaned her head on my shoulder during the Uber ride home, and I rested my chin against her hair like I always had. But I wasn't there. Not really. I was somewhere deep inside myself, drifting through half-lit memories like a ghost in my own life. Nothing exploded. Nothing cracked. It all just compressed. Folded inward. I stopped reacting. I started studying. Her voice during our wedding vows, how it quivered slightly on the word forever. The look on her face when we signed the papers for the house, proud but distant. Her panic when we lost the pregnancy, raw, real, but now I couldn't tell if it was ours or just hers. All of it was true, but I no longer believed it was whole. I became a spectator in my own marriage. Watching, analyzing, preserving the illusion. Every conversation a scene. Every touch a repetition. We were a couple performing the shape of love, and the applause was just the silence we shared when it was over. And then one night, after the lights were off and our breathing had nearly synced, she rolled over and whispered, "I'm so glad I married you." I didn't move. Just stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows shift. I wanted to ask, did you write him again? I wanted to say, you gave me your loyalty. But did he get your heart? But I didn't. Because some questions don't open doors. They just remove walls and let everything fall apart. So I kept quiet. And the silence wasn't avoidance anymore. It was survival. Because pretending things are okay isn't always delusion. Sometimes it's a kindness. Sometimes it's armor. And sometimes it's just the only way you can stay in the same room with someone who doesn't know they're still breaking you. It wasn't one moment. It was a slow erosion. One thought that never left. I wasn't chosen. I was accepted. We were at the farmer's market. A bright Sunday morning, the kind with woven baskets, children with balloon animals, the air warm with the smell of cut fruit and bread. She held a jar of honey to the light and said, "This was the kind you liked, right?" I hadn't bought that kind in years. But I knew who had. I knew whose toast she'd made it for. Whose tea she'd stirred. Whose sweetness still lingered in her mouth when she said my name. Maybe she didn't realize what she said. Maybe she did. It didn't matter. Because in that moment, something inside me shifted. The architecture of everything we'd built, every room, every memory tilted just slightly. Just enough to see the cracks beneath the paint. The places where the foundation had never been leveled to begin with. She moved on to the next vendor, smiling. Unaware. Or pretending. Or both. That night, when the lights were low and she was humming in the bathroom, I walked back to the drawer where I'd first found the letter. I didn't open it. I didn't search. I just stood there. Let the memory breathe. Let the truth settle its weight in my chest like wet cloth. I thought about all the little choices that had built our life. The rented tuxedo. The champagne flutes. The keys to our first apartment. I thought about the way her eyes sparkled when she saw the house we live in now. The garden she said we'd plant. The family we almost had. And I thought, none of it began with me. I wasn't the first page in her story. I wasn't even the second. She gave me her promises, her loyalty, her life. But not her beginning. And once you realize you were someone's plan B, you stop auditioning for permanence. No confrontation. No righteous anger. No dramatic scene of betrayal. Because some endings don't need to be declared. They just arrive. Quietly. Like dust collecting on a letter you no longer need to reread. She never lied to my face. That's what hurt the most. She just let me believe. We were watching a movie. Some light romantic drama with predictable arcs and carefully timed strings. A story about two people who find their way back to each other after years apart. She cried at the end. Not dramatically, just a few quiet tears. She wiped them with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. Mine, actually. One I hadn't worn in weeks. And then she said, I used to believe in that kind of love. Used to. She didn't look at me when she said it. Her gaze stayed on the credits, like she was speaking to no one in particular. Or maybe to someone who wasn't me. I looked at her then. Really looked. She was aging beautifully. Softer now, more tender in the way her body moved. Her hair was tied up, wisps falling loose around her face. Her feet tucked under her on the couch, cradled by a blanket we picked out together. She looked like home, but I felt nothing. Not hate, not longing, just clarity. That letter? It wasn't a betrayal. It wasn't some reckless act of passion or some grand deception. It was something quieter, sadder. It was a confession, an artifact from a life she wanted but couldn't have. A truth she folded away and hid, hoping it would fade in the shadows of the life she chose instead. Maybe she thought she buried it deep enough. Maybe she forgot it existed. But what she forgot even more was that I existed. Not just as her husband, not just as her daily routine, but as a person, a heart, a presence in the room that once glowed under her attention, now flickering somewhere just outside her reach. And that heart, it still beat, quieter now, slower, further and further away from her. Not because I was leaving, but because, in every way that matters, I already had. She sensed it before I said a word. But I never said a word. I started staying late at work. First just an hour, then 2. Then I stopped checking the clock at all. I walked more. Long, meandering loops through neighborhoods I'd never noticed before. I left early on weekends under the excuse of errands. Sat in cafes alone. Watched people hold hands. Wondered what it was like to be chosen without a footnote. She noticed, of course. Asked if I wanted to plan a trip. Just us, she said, her voice light, hopeful. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere new. I told her maybe. She smiled. But her eyes didn't wait for the answer. They had already heard it. After that, she became more affectionate. Not desperate, intentional. She laughed louder at my jokes, even the ones I didn't finish. She made my favorite meals, served them with little touches like mint leaves or warmed plates. She started using the old nickname she hadn't used in years. But it wasn't revival. It was resuscitation. She was trying to touch the surface of something that had already sunk. And I let her, not out of malice, just apathy. I wasn't angry anymore. That had long since burned off like morning fog. I'd simply moved to a different country inside myself. One where the language was silence and detachment. Where she didn't know the words. The letter stayed in my briefcase. Crisp, untouched. I never showed her. Never said her name with accusation. Never asked who he was or how long it lasted, or if she ever wrote him again. Because what would be the point? She already gave me everything she thought I needed. The groceries, the kindness, the laughter. But love, real love, isn't about maintenance. It's not a checklist. It's not a polite endurance of shared space. Love is presence. And hers had quietly left the room years ago. Now, I was only beginning to realize just how long I'd been alone. I left the ring on the windowsill. Not as a message. Just release. The morning was ordinary. She was still asleep, curled on her side the way she always did. One arm under the pillow, hair splayed like ink in water. The sun had slipped through the blinds and painted soft gold stripes across the hardwood. It looked like peace. Sounded like it too. I stood in the doorway and watched her breathe. Then I made coffee. Took a walk. The streets were quiet, the sky pale and undecided. I passed a bakery opening for the day, a man walking his dog, a little girl pulling her mother toward a puddle like it held treasure. The world didn't know I was unmaking a life. And maybe that's the strangest part, how normal it felt. I thought about the man from the letter. Not with anger. Not even jealousy. Just resignation. He never needed to reply. He already had something I never got. Her first. Her reckless. Her unfiltered. Her dream self. I only ever got the version she edited. The one she handed over after someone else had already made her feel something she never let herself feel again. When I came home, she was in the kitchen making breakfast. Eggs, toast, the pan hissing gently. She turned, smiled, said good morning. Kissed my cheek. I smiled too. Then I walked upstairs. Took off the ring. Set it on the windowsill beside the plant she always forgot to water. The one that had long since dried into something resembling life, but not quite. And I left. No final conversation. No suitcase by the door. No speech about hurt or closure. She'd wake up one day and find the stillness I'd left behind. Not out of rage. Not even sadness. But because I finally understood something I'd been circling for months. I wasn't leaving her. I was returning to myself. And sometimes the softest goodbye is the one that doesn't ask to be heard. Just seen.